Hey everyone, it's Ivan with KitBadger.com here today, continuing our journey on firearms ownership, and today we're going to talk about weapons maintenance. Firearms are hands down one of, if not the best pieces of machinery built, and have been. You can have a firearm that is well over 100 years old, and chances are it probably still works. They're incredibly well built. There's not a lot of things you can say that for. So if we want them to continue to work and work when we need them to work, might want to do a little bit of maintenance. So how do we go about cleaning our firearms? And to that end, can you over clean? You can. Did it all the time in the Marine Corps. Take all the oil off, take everything off. It's damaging. We don't want to take all the oil off. We just want to get the carbon off. But I will go over cleaning this as well as a pistol, maybe a couple common pistols, and show you how we maintain these. Before we start pulling guns apart, we need a few supplies. With respect to kind of the industry, there's a lot of snake oil out there. Honestly, almost all of it works. It might not work quite as well as some companies lead you to believe. But for example, we have this right here, which is CLP from Lucas Oil. Pretty good products. They make all kinds of oils for everything. All different industries, racing, automotive, all these different things, to include gun oil. CLP cleans, lubricates, protects, does a bunch of stuff for us, pretty handy. Then you can get other products like this, Modern Spartan Systems. This is for cleaning. It's their carbon destroyer, works great, removes carbon, doesn't do all the things that does. So they have another product, which is their accuracy oil. Two different products, kind of getting to the same task as that right there. Either way you want to do it. We then need a brush. You can honestly just use a toothbrush or something like this, pretty much made for cleaning guns. It's basically a toothbrush though, hard, firm bristles. And then depending on what you want to do, you can use something like this, which is a bore snake. Allows us to clean the bore rather than getting together cleaning rods, stuff along those lines. Get to it more later, but this is my preference. To get this ready to clean, first we need to make sure it is unloaded, remove all our ammunition from our workspace. Don't need live ammo to clean weapons. Then going to physically and visually inspect our gun, make sure it is in fact unloaded. Now to break this down, we need to make sure the bolt's forward. Send the bolt forward. This has an extra step since it is using a Law Tactical folder. In which case we need to remove this plug back here from our bolt carrier group. There we go. We can now go ahead and remove our rear takedown pin. It's going to be back here on the left side of the rifle or pistol. Push it out. At which point hinges, release your charging handle. Pull your bolt carrier all the way out and go ahead and remove your charging handle. At this point, we're going to disassemble our bolt carrier group a little bit more to clean it. With our bolt carrier, first thing we're going to do is remove this, which is the firing pin retaining pin. It can be kind of a monster to grab onto, but you basically pull it straight out. It will then, man, apparently that's kind of dirty. It'll let you slide your firing pin out. Set that aside. And then right here is our cam pin. We need to push the bolt all the way into the bolt carrier so that this can rotate like that, at which point it will come out like such. And now we can go ahead and pull the bolt straight out of the bolt carrier. At this point, this stuff looks kind of dirty. You're gonna need some sort of rag, and a t-shirt will work. You can go ahead and start with just wiping whatever you can get off of it. Obviously this has not been cleaned for a while. And then grab your brush. You can go ahead and brush any kind of like egregious chunks of carbon and stuff like that off of it. And same goes for everything else. Just trying to get like the major stuff off of it before we start applying any of our cleaning products. Then gonna do the same thing, wipe down everything first.
3.
And we can also do the same thing with our charging handle, wipe out any carbon that we have inside there as well. If you actually keep your rifle wet, i.e. keep it lubed up, this becomes a lot easier, especially if you're using a good lubricant or CLP. This obviously will come off easier. At this point, I'm gonna go ahead and use this right here, carbon destroyer, and they have ways like, hey, do this, this, whatever. At the end of the day, you end up putting it on this, and then you can let it sit for a minute if you want. This stuff is almost kind of watery. I usually just kind of rub it across everything. Well, it's recommended that you let this stuff sit. You can, or you can just get at it with a brush. Again, you want something relatively stiff bristled. If you are going to use a metal bristle brush, you'll want it to be brass so it doesn't actually start messing things up. And you're going to go through and just pretty much start scrubbing everything. After you've gone through, scrubbed everything, I come back with a rag, go ahead and wipe everything off. Depending on your bolt carrier and bolt, you may or may not have some sort of special coating like NP3. Some coatings will actually make it easier to clean, and some are also shiny, in which case you will see very distinctly where you have carbon and where is clean. This is not, but I can see wear parts or places where it is wearing, sliding through, which is fine. Just be cognizant of it, because when it comes to actually lubricating that, we're going to want to take note. And we're going to go through and just wipe everything down. To clean out inside here, if you want, you can take some fabric or Q-tip or whatever, just jam something in there, rotate it through. Usually does plenty good job. You can see stuff come out, move it over a little bit until you're satisfied with how clean that is. Same thing if you want to clean back in there. That side, honestly, doesn't matter as much. But at this point, we've cleaned the lion's share of the carbon off. Is there still some carbon on here? Yeah, definitely, especially back here, and that will build up as soon as you fire your first shot. So kind of non-issue. So now we're going to put this together and re-lube it. You can use pretty much anything, but what we do want to make sure we do is whatever we lube it with when we put it together, ideally just continue. Is it important? Not really, up until the point you have some that are water-based and others that aren't, and then they don't play well together. So when in doubt, go big. Pretty much gonna cover this thing right here. Going to put it inside this bolt carrier, and if you look on the bolt, there's a side that does not have a little kind of scallop section right there. And so that side, we want facing up towards this opening there. We'll slide that in, and we will look down, line it up, so that we can then still have plenty of lube on my hands. So just kind of coat that cam pin some. You can actually put grease on the cam pin, it will help it. It's kind of a high wear spot, but either way, turn that back so it won't come out, pull the bolt forward, and then go ahead and drop our firing pin in. You can put a little more lube on it, drop it down in there. and then press it, make sure it's seated all the way, at which point take your firing pin retaining pin, slide that guy back in, and now we will lube this once more. We'll also put some lube on this before we reinstall it. But now that we have this back together, we can actually make sure our gas rings are good, which are the little silver rings around the actual bolt. And we do that by just standing it up, even though this isn't totally level. There we go. And if it can maintain its own weight, the weight of the bolt carrier group on the bolt with those gas rings, you're good to go. Now we're going to move on to the upper receiver. Quickly on the lower receiver, people go down the rabbit hole with cleaning this out, Q-tips, everything like that. Honestly, the place where, for me, most of the carbon builds up is just kind of right around this bolt catch, bolt release. If you want, you can get Q-tips, or you can just go ahead, take an old shirt, rub it through there, get everything you can get to include in the magazine well. Most guns, they really don't get that dirty. This one has gotten really dirty because I shoot it suppressed, so a lot of carbon comes back into it. As far as the upper receiver, like the actual upper receiver portion, we usually take a t-shirt, go ahead, just start wiping it out. It doesn't need to be anything crazy. If you wanna go down the rabbit hole with some Q-tips, you do you. I enjoy shooting more than I enjoy cleaning. And as long as most of it is out of there, I'm plenty happy. As far as the star chamber in the barrel, which is basically where all the lugs from your bolts lock up, again, you can clean that out. Doesn't really matter. Whatever you can usually get with a pinky and a t-shirt, probably good to go. At this point, do we put together cleaning rods, put a brush through it, a bunch of patches? You can. If that's you, you do you. Usually I will take some sort of, something like this, carbon destroyer, and I will either put it directly onto a snake or just go ahead, squirt some into that chamber, throw that back on, doesn't all leak out. And then I'll take a bore snake. What this does is cleans out the barrel. So you'll drop the weighted section down, and then right in here, you have a portion where there's actually copper in this material, like spiral around. And so you'll put that in there, pull it down, make sure it doesn't get caught up, pull it all the way through. And you end up with a nice clean bore. You can do that a couple times, which I will do it one more time. And then what we're gonna do after this is we're gonna go ahead and put, again, whatever type of lubricant, something like that. Don't want to leave this dry. And nice and clean. Now that I've cleaned out the bore, I'll take some of my lubricant, liberally apply it. If it drips out the barrel, I'm not that concerned. But once I've applied it on there, I'm gonna go ahead and take this bore snake and run it through again. That'll make sure that basically there isn't a bunch of bare metal. Not that it wouldn't be okay. Most barrels are lined and they're incredibly resilient, but there we go. Run it through one more time for good measure, and then we'll get this thing put back together. As I go to reassemble this, I definitely want to make sure I lube parts that need to be lubed. While the charging handle doesn't make much contact, if you look along these top edges, you can see a little bit of silver. That is because it has made contact. So I'll usually go ahead and put just a little bit across the top, and then we're going to put the charging handle in, start putting upward pressure. We'll feel where the recessed notches are in here, and it moves up into the channel. And then as it moves forward from there, it's then captured. As far as our bolt carrier group, again, we see all these little wear marks, and that is basically where it's making contact, to include all this where it's resetting the hammer every time. So we're gonna go through, and again, you can't really put too much lubricant, so go big. I always throw some in that cam slot also, and right around the bolts. And if you want, you can go ahead, push the bolt down, bring it forward. We want to make sure the bolt is all the way forward, otherwise it will not be able to seat. We then, gas key right here, goes into the space on the underside of our charging handle, slides all the way forward, push it till it seats. Right there, we can go ahead and bring the upper and lower back together. That goes back in, our rear takedown pin, and at this point, you would do a function check. I cannot yet because this is a loft holder. So I need to go ahead and bring my bolt carrier back just a tiny bit so I can access it, at which point I'm going to take this extension here and work it into there. Push it all the way forward, push that forward, depress that, seat the bolt all the way forward, at which point I can go ahead and close that. Now at this point, we will do a function check. We want to make sure this thing is working. I'm going to pull the charging handle all the way back, release it, with it on safe, attempt to pull the trigger, does not work, put it on the fire, keep the trigger back, charge it, get that reset, and pull it again, reset, back on safe, we're good to go. When it comes to cleaning pistols, concepts, principles, largely the same. First thing we want to do, make sure they are in fact unloaded, visually and physically inspect them, and then we're going to remove all ammunition from the area. Don't need live ammo to clean weapons. And now we're going to go ahead and take these apart. Right here, two fairly common pistols, Glock 17, Sig P365 XL. Little nuance differences with respect to taking them apart. The Glock actually requires you to pull the trigger. Again, make sure you do not have any live ammunition. Slide goes forward, point in a safe direction, press the trigger back. And then this piece is connected to that piece. It's our takedown. We are going to pull down this direction from the frame. And when we do that, we're going to pull the slide back slightly and then let it go forward. After that, we can let this go back up. That will allow us to push the slide all the way forward. And then we have our frame, and then we have the slide as well as recoil spring, and right here we have our barrel. All those come out. Sig, a little different. We are not required to pull the trigger. Once we lock it back, over on the left side of the frame, we have that. We move that down away from the frame, at which point we're going to pull the slide back a tiny bit and all the way forward and off. We then have our grip module, our trigger. We have our recoil spring, goes out, and then we have our trigger and our slide. When it comes to cleaning the grip module or frame, if you have really persistent carbon, you can of course use some solvent, use a brush, get in all the little cracks with Q-tips if you want. Honestly, most of the time, I will just take a cloth and go ahead, and you can usually just wipe out most of any of the carbon that is built up on there. When we get over to our barrel, sometimes you'll get carbon fouling, stuff along those lines actually in the barrel. You can, if you want, go ahead, punch that out. Glock, actually, all their pistols ship with a little cleaning brush. Punch it straight through there. Otherwise, you can end up getting bore snakes for the caliber, diameter of the barrel. Those work fine. The place I actually do clean though is usually just on the feed ramp there. Most of the carbon will come off pretty easy. If it isn't, you can go ahead and use solvent, but you'll end up just getting any of the carbon that's built up along that ramp right there where the bullets feed in, and then just wipe everything down. Make sure you get all that carbon off, or most of it, and you're good to go. As far as on the slide, you'll see where carbon kind of begins to build up. Usually it's actually right back along this face and where the ejector is. So if you need to, throw solvent in there or just take your brush, scrub out what you can. It'll usually come off pretty easy, especially if you don't keep your guns super dry. As long as you keep them lubricated, it'll help in the cleaning process. And then you can go and just wipe all that out. and move on. As far as our spring, occasionally I'll wipe it down. Usually it doesn't really collect any carbon. And at this point, again, if you wanted to punch that bore out, you can. I'm not going to. So we're going to reassemble. When we lubricate our pistol, while it's difficult to over lubricate a pistol, it really comes down to how are you using this. This meaning a carry pistol, and I have it on my person. I don't want it dripping off here. It's going to end up getting all over my clothes. Rather not do that. But when we end up lubricating this, you can usually see wear spots. So for example, I'll go ahead and throw some oil on the barrel here. I will just go ahead and rub it across the entire thing. And along here, you can see a little wear spot corresponds with inside of our slide. So with just the oil that's on my hands, I'll throw it on there, go ahead and slide that barrel in. Gonna put my spring back in. It locks down on a flat surface right there. And at this point, we can go ahead and lubricate anything in here. Usually the surface along there, I'll lubricate. And for this, I'll just put some oil on my hand, go ahead and put it along there. That way it doesn't get crazy. If you want then on your frame or receiver, where it rides. So basically along these rails, we'll go ahead and put some lubricant across there. And then to put this together, our slide goes back onto our grip module and we push it all the way back, at which point that latches forward, or back in this direction rather, at which point our slide is now captured. It won't come off. To function check, point in a safe direction, pull the trigger, we hear the striker go forward, release it, we get that reset. We can do it one more time. Reset, and we're good to go. Our Glock, largely the same. I put it mostly back together. I'm gonna put a little bit of oil on my finger, and you have the actual pieces of metal rail on the front as well as the back. To reassemble this, we're gonna go ahead, line up those rails. And this time we're going to go all the way back. And I went ahead and locked the slide to the rear. As it pushes past these takedowns on either side, it locks in so that when we send the slide forward, it is now captured. This, a little bit different with respect to function check. This has that blade safety on the trigger. So without overpowering and breaking the safety in there, gently try and pull the trigger to the rear. And without depressing that blade safety, it shouldn't go. Then point in a safe direction, press all the way through. You heard that striker go forward, bring it out, feel that reset, again, and that reset. We are good to go. That right there is not the way, but it is a way for cleaning pistols as well as rifles. Here's the big takeaway. Keep them cleaned and lubricated. These have the potential to save your life. We want to keep them in good working order. So occasionally knock that carbon off and make sure they're lubricated. Keeping your weapons lubricated, probably the single biggest factor in getting rid of any type of malfunction you would potentially have. Very, very important. When should we clean our weapons? Totally up to you. One school of thought is clean them after you go to the range. That's fine. Or another school of thought, clean them before you go to the range, because then after you're done shooting at the range, it's a known quantity. It was just firing, it's probably gonna fire again. Granted, if we do a good job with our function check, it's probably gonna fire after we clean it as well. Totally up to you. I will say you can over clean, did it all the time in the Marine Corps, don't do that. While they don't need to be dripping, we definitely want them wet versus dry. It will help with longevity as well as just overall function. But we will continue our journey with the next episode, which will be the last one. And as always, thanks for joining us at kitbadger.com. Look forward to seeing you next time.